Hey everyone, welcome back to Purposeful Armament. Today I'm going to be yapping, so buckle up. Now, I've seen on plenty of channels, basically everyone who trains with a firearm, including my own channel, comments along the lines of, oh, it must be really easy if your targets aren't shooting back at you, or oh, it's really easy when you know where all your targets are at. So I thought I would take a little bit of time today to sit down and talk about the reasons why we train, the reasons why we compete, and how training and competing makes you a better shooter and thus makes you more capable in a gunfight. So let's get into it. Let's first talk about the flat range. When we're at the flat range, we are training our fundamentals with our firearms. Let me give you guys an analogy. I'm sure everyone is familiar with sports, or if you're not familiar with sports, you at least are familiar with the concept of sports. If you're, say, playing basketball, for instance, and you're on a basketball team who practices, when you go to practice, you don't spend the whole entire time just playing 5-on-5. No, you sit down and you dedicate time to conditioning. Maybe you dedicate time to practicing your three-point shots, layups, free throws. Maybe you practice defense, maybe you practice offense. All of those are breaking down the core of the game into its fundamentals and then practicing those fundamentals. We do the exact same thing when we're at the flat range training. Think about your grip. Think about your draw stroke. Think about sight acquisition. Think about target acquisition, recoil control, all sorts of different stuff, even more technical stuff like target transitions or moving while shooting. That's all stuff that we practice on the flat range. Now, you don't have to have someone come with you and randomly set up targets downrange because number one, that's really just not logistically that advantageous for you. And number two, it takes away from the fundamentals that you're supposed to be practicing. It takes away from focusing on getting the right grip, from focusing on your trigger press, from focusing on your sight alignment. And it focuses more on, can I find the target rather than can I actually shoot the gun? Now, just like with that basketball player who's going to practice every day, at the end of the week, you're going to have a game. Competition is very important in becoming a better basketball player, but it's also important in becoming a better shooter. Number one, you get to apply your skills that you have been practicing in a more pervasive environment, and you get to see how you stack up against other people. So that basketball player will practice all week and they'll go into a game and then they'll be able to actually see how they stack up, how well they actually do, maybe stuff that they need to work on. We do the exact same thing with shooting competitions, although it's probably not every single week. It's kind of expensive. Some of the best shooters in the world, actually the best shooters in the world, are competition shooters. Full stop, end of story, period. Any metric that you want to measure a shooter on, a competitive shooter is going to always outperform everyone else. They are just the best shooters in the world. I don't care if your uncle can shoot a Coke can at 750 yards with a 22. Competitive shooters are the best shooters in the world. Now, I know what you might say. Oh, well, they have these really highly optimized guns for competition, and they're not the kind of guns that you would carry for CCW or for duty use. And you're absolutely right, but I can promise you that if you give Jerry Michalek a Glock 19 and you gave me that same Glock 19 and we shot the same stage, he would beat me every single time. Likewise, if you gave me a CZ Shadow 2 that's fully optimized for competition and you gave Jerry Michalek that same gun, he will beat me every single stage, every time. Why is that? Because you can't buy skill. Skill is only something that you can acquire through dedicated practice. That's it. You can't purchase it. So competitions also induce a little bit more stress than you actually might think. So if you've never been to a shooting competition, I will give you guys sort of my experience. When you go to these competitions, typically they are about 3.5 to 4 hours long, depending on how many people are there. And with that 3.5 to 4 hours, an average stage, of which there are probably 5, 6, maybe 7, an average stage is going to be, if you're not going particularly fast, if you're not going particularly slow, it's probably going to be around maybe a minute, minute and a half long. So over the course of 4 hours, you're shooting for like 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, it's not a lot. And you really don't get to go and actually, practice or warm up. You see the stages typically the day of, typically right before you're about to shoot them. You get about 10 minutes to look through the stage, come up with a game plan, and then it's go time. You don't get time to, run through it a couple of times to see if you can, nail every single target. That's live fire, of course. You can walk through it with dry fire, but You don't get to, pull your gun out and, practice around. You just do the course. That's it. So that in and of itself gives you a little bit of stress. It's not something that is going to be, practiced for a couple of hours before you attempt it. Not to mention, these courses are also quite a bit more complex than what you're probably used to shooting on the flat range. I mean, these courses are typically pretty high round count and are pretty complicated. There's lots of different targets everywhere. You can't shoot all of the targets from one single position. You do have to move around. That can be quite a bit more complicated than what you do at the flat range. Even if you are moving around on the flat range, these courses of fire, these stages are still significantly more complex. With that being said, you also are typically in a group of people, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 people, who most of the time you don't really know. And so there is added pressure of knowing that there's a group of people who are watching you shoot and who will go through after you're finished shooting and will not critique, not judge, but they will at least visually inspect your targets to view your hits. And then all of that data is compiled all together, and then you put on a leaderboard against everyone else. So it is, it is kind of daunting sometimes for some people. Now, at a competition, there is a lot of mental acuity as well. That's why when you compete, your fundamentals have to be your fundamentals have to be locked in, quite frankly, because there's a lot of other things that are happening in these complex stages. You don't really have time to sit there and be like, oh, is my grip right? Is my sight picture right? Like, you just kind of have to go, if that makes sense. At least that's been my experience. You have to think about things like, oh, do I need to take a makeup shot to hit that target? There's targets of all varying different sizes. It's not just all, full-size silhouettes. There's some smaller steel targets typically, at least the courses I've been to. Sometimes they're moving, sometimes they have different, unique quirks. Sometimes you can shoot a target from multiple different locations, so you have to kind of figure out what is the best location to shoot that target from to give you the best chance of getting accurate hits quickly. A lot of things that you have to mentally think about. I'll give you guys an anecdotal example, and I'll play the footage right now too. This was probably the second or third stage at one of the pistol competitions I went to, the most recent one, and I was shooting the stage, engaging the targets. I took a couple of extra makeup shots, so I kind of got out of whack in my reloads. So my gun runs dry, slide locks back. I decide that, well, while I'm moving, I'm going to do the reload because that's going to be the quickest, most efficient movement. Well, in doing that, I completely forgot about a single target that was probably, I don't know, maybe 5 feet in front of me. And I just completely ran past it while I was doing this reload because I just tunnel visioned, and I didn't even realize I missed the target until the end whenever he said, hey, you missed this target. So there is quite a bit of, mental pressure that goes on. There's pressure from, the people watching you, and there's pressure from just the sheer nature of competition. So yes, there is added pressure. And that goes to show, that anecdote goes to show that even if you know where all your targets are at, with enough complexity, you can forget. I mean, we're all human, right? You can forget. So competition does make you a good shooter because it forces you to take on more complex shooting tasks. It forces you to see how you stack up against other people. You can't really cope your way out of that. And it forces you to be very solid on your fundamentals. And you can identify a lot of things that you need to work on by going to competition that you might not be able to identify on the flat range. Because on the flat range, we're maybe doing a Mozambique, we're doing a build drill, and we can just do that drill. It's a couple of seconds long, and that's it. Now, of course, our targets don't shoot back. There is no training on the face of this planet anywhere, whether it's military, law enforcement, or otherwise, that has forces or people shooting live ammunition trying to kill each other. That just isn't something that's trained. That's not something that happens. You can, even if you believe the Spetsnaz who were showing off to Larry Vickers in that video, which I don't necessarily believe that they do that, but even if they do, that's like the only place where you're ever going to see anyone shooting live ammunition at someone else in a training scenario. It just doesn't happen. You watch NATO or you watch the US military do live fire exercises, they're shooting at targets. Sometimes they'll do, blank fire exercises where they're just kind of doing movements and they're just kind of like shooting blanks. They're not shooting live ammunition back and forth on one another. That's period, end of story. Now, you could do things like simunition or airsoft or paintball. I've done all of those. Yes, they hurt, but you will never, ever be able to recreate the feeling of someone trying to kill you unless someone is actually trying to kill you. So that's kind of an entirely moot point. Also, by the way, there is a difference between military engagements and civilian CCW self-defense engagements. Military engagements are something that we're probably not really going to have to deal with, to be quite honest with you. But military engagements are much less of, I see the target, I'm going to put my sights on the target and shoot the target. It's much more like, oh, they're in the tree line, they're in the ditch, they're in the compound. If you don't believe me, just look up combat footage on YouTube or, Funkers or wherever. You can find combat footage. That's typically how it goes, unless it's like some, high-speed special forces stuff. With that being said, CCW footage is all over the place as well. You can look at channels like Active Self-Protection. I believe his name is John Correa. He does a great job of sitting down, watching footage of self-defense CCW shootings and analyzing them and breaking them down. And typically those shootings are very close distances, like 10 yards tops. And they're typically the self-defender pulls his pistol and engages a target. And that's basically it. So if you go to the flat range and you train, you're going to be better equipped in that scenario than just some random Joe Blow. Let's do another analogy, shall we? Take Jerry Michalek and take some random Joe Blow who only trains twice a year. If you put Jerry Michalek in a self-defense shooting environment and you put random Joe Blow in that same environment, Jerry Michalek will come out on top every single time. He'll be able to draw faster and he will be able to deliver more shots on target quicker and more accurately than random Joe Blow who trains twice a year. Why is that? Because Jerry has an incredibly fast draw on the flat range. He has incredibly fast split times on the flat range. He's incredibly accurate on the flat range. All of that stuff translates over to an actual CCW encounter. Now, I will concede that Jerry will probably have a slower pretty much everything in the real world, when he's in a compromised position, drawing from concealment, shooting an actual person, those kind of things. Obviously, your adrenaline is going to affect your speed and your accuracy, but you're still going to be in a much better place if you actually train than if you're just some random Joe Blow who doesn't train. I mean, there is something genuinely to be said about someone who has a sub-second draw from concealment on the flat range. There is something to be said about someone who has a sub-2-second build drill on the flat range. Yeah, of course, all of those times are going to increase whenever you're starting to dump adrenaline and be in an actual encounter. But you're still going to be in a far better place than having not trained at all. So I hope that gave you guys a little bit of insight into why we train, why we compete, and how that makes you a better shooter. Because it really genuinely does make you a better shooter. And being a better shooter is going to make you more of an asset in a gunfight if, God forbid, you ever have to get into one. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought about this discussion down in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Remember, stay armed and keep training.